My name is Jim Gordon. I spent 36 years in the Navy, retired in '97. Yeah, I brought in a shovel, basic shovel today, but it was a sod turning shovel for the Chiefs and Petty Officers Mess, used in 1959, and it became a trophy among the submariners. It was mostly just interesting to submariners. Now it's gained some interest from others.
First conceived in 1578 by English mathematician William Bourne, submarines were widely implemented in combat at the onset of the First World War. During this period, the Royal Canadian Navy acquired two of its own, the CC-1 and CC-2. Active throughout the war effort, these naval vessels fostered a unique subculture among crews that distinguished them from their surface ship counterparts. Years later, during the Cold War, Britain's 6th Submarine Division trained RCN members aboard its subs as they prepared for the 1st Canadian Submarine Squadron, formed in 1966. For 30 years, the unit operated its Oberon-class submarines under the Royal Canadian Navy until they were decommissioned and replaced by the HMCS Victoria-class. In 2014, the Canadian Armed Forces celebrated 100 years of submarines in the RCN.
So Jim, this shovel really represents a very unique part of Submariner culture. Can you tell me a bit about the Brotherhood of Submariners and how this shovel fits into that culture?
Commonwealth countries were very tight. There was always a competition, we do it better than you do. We dive deeper than you do. So that competition between navies was wide open. I brought in the shovel. It became a trophy or a challenge through the years. It was put in a cabinet when the new Chiefs and Petty Officers Mess opened up, and the Royal Navy sailors take on anything as a challenge, so they were there the day of the grand opening when they put the shovel in the cabinet, spoke about it, and then that night, over a few wets and looking at the shovel and admiring it, knowing that they were going to sea the next morning and returning back to England, the challenge was on. That's where it started. Many different units and navies became involved, and it would be stolen by the Royal Navy, by the Australians, by the New Zealanders. Even the Australian Wrens got involved. The German air movements people got involved, and the Americans. So it moved around the country. I arrived in Dolphin sometime in 1979, and I didn't even know about the shovel behind the bar. Of course, I did a lot of training in Dolphin, and I was there, and I'd just been promoted to Petty Officer First Class, which gave me privilege to the Chief's Mess. When I got in there, I saw this hung on the bulkhead behind the bar. And right away, they started. They knew I was a colonial, so big smiles. You're here to get the spade? Good luck with that. It was locked up better than the crown jewels. It wasn't to be had anymore. They owned it. Eventually, I had a plan. So when I would go to the mess, I would sit over on one side and I would tuck tools up under the settee. And I got what I thought were the necessary tools. At night when the bar shut, a big steel cage come rolling down and locked into the bar at the bottom. And I had checked it out, and there was all these lugs, and I thought, well, I'll never get at that. But it was held together with nuts and bolts. And then I had to figure out how to get in there after hours. I decided it was best to break in through a window, if I could wind up with one unlocked. And that would mean climbing up on the roof behind, climbing in through a window, and then assembling the bar. I did that. So in the dark of the night, at about midnight, and made my way out with the shovel.
What an amazing piece of history. I mean, an ordinary shovel all of a sudden gained a life and a story and a culture over a series of years. Submariners have a very unique, tight community, and I think that shovel is a wonderful representation of the unity that this group of people do have.
It has become famous now. Since '79 on to when it was retired in the late '90s, everybody wanted a piece of that action to get a tally plate on. And like I said, I put it on the board simply because I expected it was going to have a lot of tally plates on it.
So Jim, what is so unique about this particular artifact is that it started off as a shovel, and just an ordinary shovel, broke ground on a new building, it was hung in a mess. But over time, through tradition, through Submariners, it had a new life. As a trophy, as an artifact, it's a unique part of Submariner culture and history. It has been documented on this shovel, so every plaque is a representation of that exchange, of it going back and forth between us and the British and the Australians and the Americans at one point, you were saying. And so I think that's pretty unique. So for an ordinary shovel, it has become a wonderful part of our Royal Canadian Navy history.
The stuff that we did underwater, we couldn't talk about. This we can talk about.
Jim, thank you so much for bringing this artifact in. It really is a unique part of our Canadian naval history. Currently, it is on display at the Naval Museum of Halifax in the submarine room. Why do you think it's important that people see this artifact and know its story?
It was a big part of the Oberon-class culture. The culture has changed in the Navy, as many will recognize. They've quieted down. You're not allowed to do certain things, like perhaps nick a shovel or break in somewhere. They frown on it now, and they don't have near as much fun as what we had, or we think it's that way anyway. So we wanted to make sure that this part of our culture in Oberon-class submarines was remembered and displayed, and the new era submariners would see it and go raise an eyebrow. And some old submariners out there, we couldn't go to war then. They were too busy stealing shovels. I hope the artifact remains in a prominent place in the museum so that many people will see it over the years. And maybe some of the grandchildren who would come through and say, hey, my granddad told me about that. Don't count it safe at any time. And not just for me, because there's still some old submariners out there. They'll take that museum on as a challenge.
Noted.